So are we going to build some places to stay on Cash's Ledge and do some ecotourism 50 feet down or something? I heard ecotourism was good for us. No, I guess not. You know, if one person really laughs at my bad jokes, then you're encouraging me, and that's, enabling. So we're doing well on time. We have time now for Q&A. So if our speakers would mind coming up again, and we'll open the floor for questions and comments. We have a couple of mics. Could we have a couple of volunteers to walk around with the mics and volunteers? Volunteers. We have volunteers. You volunteering? Christopher, go.
Turn off the projector though? Sorry.
Oh no, it's designed to do that.
Oh great.
Yeah, just press. Yeah.
Thank you.
It says it's on. It doesn't.
Yeah, it's on. Okay, questions? Answers?
There's a question over there in the corner. Two of them.
On a local level, what would each of you say is maybe like the best organization or charity or anything to get involved with to help protect habitats and sort of encourage biodiversity? Kind of a general question.
Yeah, we both mic. So can you answer it in this mic?
Sure. Where do you live? I'll go first. Okay.
Andy could use the mic because they're.
Sure. Or, hi, is you able to hear me? It's
Well,
loud.
they're video.
I'm loud. Oh, for
video.
videotape. All right. Well, if you're from Somerville, so I'm gonna give a contextualized answer, because I think if you said local, right? The closest nature to you is either the Mystic River Watershed Association or the Friends of the Fells, and those two places really, really do a great job in protecting the habitats that are most local to your environment that influence the local ocean. That's a very hyper-local answer, but there you go. You're welcome.
Well, I was harassing Randi, so I'll just share with the whole class my questions. One was, anyway, thank you, all of you, and thank you for helping our beautiful oceans. What I asked her was, should we not even eat fish at all? And if we do, what kind of tuna fish am I allowed to eat? And then my second question was, how can we actually, I think everyone is kind of answering it all along, is how can we help our watersheds? I live in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and I think my watershed goes to the Chesapeake Bay, which certainly needs help. So thank you.
Anybody can answer. Want me to take it? Do you want to take a stab at it? Sure. Sure. All right.
All of you tell us what kind of fish you're going.
Okay, you guys answer that one first.
Well, I know that they have the Seafood Watch. The Monterey Bay Aquarium has this thing called the Seafood Watch, and they publish a card, and it basically tells you what species are threatened, which species aren't threatened, which one's a good one to eat, which one's not a bad one to eat. Seafood Watch, the Monterey Bay Aquarium.
I mean, for me, I stopped eating fish a few years ago, probably since I've been in college, so about 3 years. But I totally realize that that isn't a lifestyle everyone can do for different health or cultural reasons. But I'm proof that you can live a healthy lifestyle without fish, if that's something you're considering. And it's also, you're not giving up much in my book. That, like, it's totally doable if that's something you want, but realistically, that's not for everyone. So
I have nothing to add.
I eat fish. And the reason I do is because I am not a vegetarian. That would be the best thing for me to do. But the alternative to eating fish for protein is often beef for a lot of people. which is not a better alternative in many ways from an environmental standpoint. Sorry. I know there's a talk about that. We can. There you go. And so I guess I should caveat that, which may not be a better alternative in an environmental standpoint. I'm not saying that every fish is great for consumption. There are certainly some which are harvested in a more sustainable way than others. There are lots of really, really, really well-farmed shellfish, which I think are really good options for people. I think there are some really great and well-managed fisheries. Alaska is a great example of real-time managed fisheries, which are, just a shining example for the world, I think, in many ways. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say about beef, so I'm going to turn this to you.
Should I take this on?
Take on the cows.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, first of all, what I'm going to say is that let's put aside the question of whether you should or shouldn't eat beef, because that's totally up to you. But what I will say is that in many landscapes, we absolutely need animals on the land, because that's the way these lands evolved, and that's how.
I see your point.
Okay.
I got it.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
Okay. All right. So, I can go more into detail, but this is an oceans conference, so I won't. Or you could just read my book, Cows Save the Planet. But actually.
I haven't. I need to.
But one thing to know is that increasingly, and this has happened more and more in the last several years, that there are sources of meat where the farmers will tell you, the ranchers will tell you that, well, you will be able to know that the meat was raised in a way that restores the landscape. So that opens up a whole new discussion. Absolutely, industrial raised beef is really bad environmentally. That there is no question about that. But there is an alternative, and that's becoming more viable because there are now some certification programs that are beginning to develop, and people are becoming more aware of it. But a lot of our landscapes, this is New England, so this is very different, but grasslands around the world, grasslands represent about 40% of the world's land mass, and those environments developed in conjunction with grass-eating animals. And when either those animals are not on the land or those animals are managed inappropriately, it leads to a degraded landscape and desertification. So
Glad to hear we're mostly on the same page here, which is
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
basically pay attention to exactly where your food is coming from, because multiple sources.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents. I was vegetarian for 40 years and vegan for 15 of those. And look what happened to me. I know. I was going to tell a joke, but I won't. And now I eat widely. And what I eat is important to me, and what it does to the environment that the animals or the food comes from is important to me. And particularly with beef, there are so many reasons to eat 100% grass-fed beef, including the health of the grasslands, the healthfulness of the meat that you eat, omega-3 fatty acids are essential fatty acids because we can't produce them in our bodies. And cows can't either. But cows eat grass, and those are fatty acids that are found in grasses. So when you eat grass-fed animals, you are getting a completely different fatty acid profile than when you're eating CAFO-fed animals. And those differences are very important for your own health. So we're all connected this way, it seems, and the bounty in the grasslands, and I'm sure there are ocean equivalents of this, when the animals and the grasses are working the way nature intended, the ranchers who switch often find that they don't have enough animals to keep up with the growth of the grasses. And you can double or quadruple your herd density and still be racing with the grasses because everything is getting so healthy and so abundant and so productive. And somebody asked me at lunch whether I thought we could really feed 7 billion people, and I didn't used to. But seeing the potential abundance of nature when we're harmonious is just striking, like with Paradise Lot and so many other examples. I commend to you our 6 previous conferences. All the speaker presentations are on our website. You go to the program page on each conference, and there are really some great talks there. We're a tiny organization, but we've had 60,000 views of our videos. So, yes, I'm very hopeful, and we will get to work because Sarah's generation needs us to do that, and we need to do that too. And Randy's generation, Kid, Professor Kid. And Dr. Mom, with 2 kids who are growing fins. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Well, now that we have like an expert in land and many experts in ocean, I would like to ask you, because today we have the trend that we have to complete our daily meals with supplements, like vitamin supplements, including krill and omegas from fish oil, but also vitamins, vitamin C, like from citrus fruits. So I would like to know what is the impact of all these supplements in the environment, because it's really like everybody encouraged to take supplements.
I think that's to you. You've written books about food.
Okay. All right. I don't know exactly what the impact is. However, if you look at the supplements that we also often are told to add to our diets, this is something that an insight that someone told me, and I realized, of course, that the list of those often tends to correlate with what a soil test looks like. So, if we look at it from the other perspective, that if we have food that is grown, plants and animals grown on healthy soil, well, maybe we won't need those supplements.
Or you could just have dinner with a side of dirt. I love that.
That, I wouldn't stop you. So that's what I would say, and I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
What about the fish
I'm outside of my expertise. I'm a coral reef scientist, so.
I used to. What about the fish oil supplements? In some ways, this gets back to the talk that I gave, because the question is, as individuals, as families, as small groups, we tend to want to take care of ourselves, which is a perfectly good survival strategy in the short run, and if we handle our relationship to the rest of the world right, in the long run. What people do with fish oils, and fish oils are a real problem. There is one company, Omega Protein, that monopolizes and destroys fisheries because they work in the one state that allows them to harvest menhaden, which are a forage fish at the bottom of the food chain, and causing tremendous havoc in food cycles, trophic cycles. So there is that part of it, and there is the health part of it. I can tell you of truly amazing cures that I have seen and personally experienced from fish oils. the kinds of things that you go to doctors for and take toxic fossil fuel-based pharmaceuticals to suppress symptoms. Fish oil can cure, and it cures because of the variety of essential fatty acids, and because, as was said, those are missing from our diets. We got some organic almonds the other day that were absolutely tasteless because they didn't have much to grow on. They were organic because there were none of these supplements, that these toxic inputs, but they were not nutritious. And there's something recently learned about organic doesn't necessarily mean nutritious. It just means unpoisoned. And so it's a dilemma. We want to get our health back when it fails. We want to grow younger, not older, particularly this time of life. But we need help, and that help has an impact on the environment, and it's a lot of juggling to do. And I take my fish oils, what can I say?
It's a Friday, and so my knowledge might be slightly off, but this question is for Randi. So from what I can recall, Kiribati is experiencing sea level rise to a large amount that islanders are having to leave, and islands are getting smaller and smaller and smaller due to landmass. Is that sea level rise and that movement of communities and people leaving taking an impact on the surrounding ecosystems, and how is that general impact on the area? What is occurring there? What do you think is going to happen in the future for those ecosystems and the people that live there?
It's a great question, but they're two really different questions. So the impact of sea level rise on people is really different than the impact of sea level rise in the surrounding ecosystems. So let me just break that down. So the maximum elevation in the country and Republic of Kiribati is 3 meters. Let that sink in for a minute, literally. It's going to be underwater, but not immediately. The thing that it's not always about the land disappearing first. It's usually about the freshwater lens getting salt infiltration, and so the drinking water being unusable, which also can prohibit agriculture and things like that. So actually, Republic of Kiribati has leased land in Fiji already as a place for their nationals to go when they have to evacuate, and they have started training their next generation with the idea that all schools are sort of trying to train the next generation to have skill sets which apply beyond the boundaries of Kiribati, so that they will be welcome in other parts of the world as they move. And so this is a huge cultural impact, and it's something that this country, it's very real for this country. You might ask, how does one of the smallest countries in the world create a California-sized MPA? And part of the reason they do it is because they know that they are going to be one of the main refugees of climate change. And so they call it their gift to humanity, and it is. This is a country that is not only very small, but it's a least developed nation. They receive most of their money from USAID, New Zealand AID, Australian. I mean, they're getting most of their money in aid. One of their only sources of actual revenue is from tuna fishing, and actually the Phoenix Islands Protected Area, because of the way the licensing structures, doesn't actually cost them anything, and there's a trust set up to supplement finances if it ever should. But they call this their gift to humanity, and so they are aware of the impacts of sea level rise. They are trying to create a gift so that when their time comes, the world will reciprocate, and they're leasing land in Fiji and proactively trying to help their residents have a place in the world. That's the human side of the equation. On the ecosystem side of the equation, it's really different. The kinds of sea level rise that we're talking about, actually, when you're talking about a coral reef, no, the coral reef is probably not going to grow to, outpace or even keep pace with the rate of sea level rise, but the impact to a coral reef is actually much less, and actually in some ways can be a lot better. To have fewer humans living right there, polluting the immediate surrounding areas, and changing and restructuring shorelines and spaces, and create a little bit more of a depth barrier between what's happening in the global scale, especially things like temperature, can have a positive impact. So very different questions, really different answers. Hope that helps. I don't know where to go next. I guess they get to
I have a gastronomic question. I'm wondering how the oysters in New England are doing. What's the state of the industry, the impact of global warming, and where do you go for your best oysters?
Do you guys have this one, or do you want me to get?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, actually, the oysters in Massachusetts are doing pretty well. First of all, oyster farming has become very popular, and more towns are allocating more land so that people can lease them and have oyster farms. Also, just naturally, I see them in Boston Harbor coming back. I see them more and more often. I see them in the Neponset River, in Dorchester Bay, even in places like Chelsea Creek where there's oil terminals. So they're doing pretty well in our state so far. As for the best oyster, I can't tell you, though. I don't eat them myself.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed the side conversation. Sorry.
Barney, are you here? You want to say something about Bryn Smith? Sure. Could you come up here and do it? Or somebody can give you a mic. You want to introduce yourself?
In the planning, is this on? Yeah. In the planning for this conference, we tried to invite a person named Bryn Smith, who runs an organization called Green Wave, which is in New Haven, Connecticut, and they are doing very healthy aquaculture, which they call 3D aquaculture because it is vertical from the bottom of the ocean to the top, and it is a restorative form of aquaculture. It also yields an amount of protein that is much greater than an equivalent amount of land, and it is done without importing any fertilizer or moving any water. The water is already there. We had hoped to have a representative of their organization. The organization is called Green Wave, and there's a wonderful TEDx talk by Bryn Smith, Bren Smith, explaining all this. And unfortunately, they could not be here because this is kelp planting season, and they are expanding to 15 new locations on the East Coast, and it's quite exciting. And I encourage you to particularly check out the TEDx talk by Bryn Smith.
Great.
So Sarah mentioned something at the beginning with the discussion on the coral canyons, and you said before your internship you had no idea about some of the biodiversity, but now it seems like second nature. And I imagine that all of you throughout your careers have accumulated a wealth of knowledge to the point where it's become second nature, that it's so comfortable to talk about. And I guess my question would be, along the lines of that obituary for the coral reef, there's a lot of misinformation to the general public and things that you feel might be second nature. How do you convey that information to the public? What are the challenges that you faced with doing that? And maybe what are some of the methods that you see in your particular fields, or just in general, how we can kind of get out of this thought bubble where everyone in this room sort of has the same motivations and vested interests? How do we get out to the general public effectively?
So I've worked for the New England Aquarium for 8 years. And while I've been a scientist there, I have had the honor of having many colleagues who think about precisely that in really targeted and specific ways to different audiences. And they do a remarkable job. But you're right. The people they speak to are mostly the people who walk through the door or click on the blog or take the class or go to the camp. so it's always this question of how do you reach somebody who wouldn't otherwise be reached. And there are experts who can probably speak to this way better than I, and I'm sure you guys have some other things to say, but my personal experience and professional experience is always to make it personal. So to find somebody in your family or a neighbor or a friend or just engage a stranger on a plane in any random conversation that you have. And if you make a personal connection, the rest of it kind of flows. And if somebody's not interested enough to walk through the door, you can lead a horse to water, right? But usually when there's when somebody you care about cares about something, that makes a difference.
Seahorses were already in water.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sarah, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's something I've been trying to figure out too, of like how to get people to care about the things I'm caring about. But so I'm an environmental studies and theater double major. So in terms of like trying to learn how to meet audiences where they're at, it's an ongoing process for sure. And I think the most important thing is just that is like, don't expect the person you're talking to understand, like, to understand where you're coming from, and like vice versa. And I think part of it and like why I've been able to have so many environmental conversations is that once you start studying it and you get more invested in it, you realize how everything is just connected to everything else. So, for example, we could be having a conversation about, I don't know, a restaurant, because we just had that, and then you start talking about fish, and then you start talking about aquaculture, and then all of a sudden you're talking about like global warming as a whole. So I think it's just like developing a personal interest, so then you begin seeing the connections everywhere, and then it kind of, I guess, let yourself become a disciple of the information, and then it becomes easier to spread. But that's also a very difficult thing to do, so.
As an author, I'd love to hear what your perspective is on this.
Thank you for the question. It's something I think about all the time. And yeah, so what often I think about is, or I find myself bumping up against, is that the way that we frame our problems limits the way that we can talk about them, and therefore limits what we see as our opportunities to do anything about them. So just also having worked in magazines and that whole realm, sometimes I joke that while it's hard for me to get an assignment on a really exciting restoration project that offers a great amount of hope, but if I wrote an article on how climate change will mean more bad hair days, I could get that. I could write about that. Yeah, exactly. So that's something I struggle with. But I'm just going to leave you with, one thing that I often say, I'm just going to go right at climate change, okay? That I feel that the way that we talk about climate change limits it kind of closes down the conversation, okay? So generally when we talk about climate change, the very phrase is code for global warming from too much CO2 in the atmosphere because of the burning of fossil fuels, okay? Because that's usually what we mean. And I would like us to consider expanding that definition. And here's how my working definition is climate change. We can see climate change as manifestations of distorted carbon, water, and energy cycles. Because once we do that, then we can see that there are opportunities. There are many ways to restore the water cycle, many ways to restore the carbon cycle, ways to restore the energy cycle by ensuring that solar radiation does not hit bare ground, because that starts a heating process, and there are many other ways too. And putting out the notion of how possible all this is to deal with. Last year we had as one of our speakers an incredibly brilliant, another Australian, Walter Yenna, who's with Healthy Soils Australia. He's a soil microbiologist. And he pointed out that given a square meter of land surface, I think that the solar radiation that hits that square meter of land is 342 watts, okay? And he said that all of our alterations of our ecological systems and dynamics affects it so that we have 3 watts per square meter too much that's being absorbed. So if you look at it that way, then that's less than 1%.
342 going in and 339 going out.
Yes.
Less than 3
Yes,
watts per square meter.
exactly. Thank you.
There's more heat in the soil than there was before.
Right, that basically that this energy cycle, you had as much solar radiation coming in as is re-radiated out, and this moves through many water processes, or heat is held in the land, condensation releases heat, transpiration absorbs heat. So what he said is that what has been altered is 3 watts per square meter that is no longer being re-radiated out. And like I said, that's less than 1%. So if we think about it that way, we can look at ways to rebalance that cycle.
I want to thank our speakers for this. Jim Laurie is going to give us a little introduction to. Sure.
For some of us, talking about this, we have to kind of go back to 5th grade or 6th grade, which was when many of us, including myself, kind of lost track of understanding what our science teachers were trying to teach us. There is now a group of us, and I'm an educator, I was a school principal, looking at and working on the curriculum K-12 and where and how we can integrate these things that we want the next generation to understand, how we can integrate that with the new next generation science standards, with the Common Core, both in mathematics and in literacy, so that we're not fighting for time in people's education, but we are building into the kind of K-12 education, public, charter, private, homeschooled, what Sarah experienced as a college student, kind of finding this world and joining it. So if there are people, my name is Barney, I'm probably the only Barney in the room. I'll be here over the weekend. If you're interested in this, or if you're already connected with schools, please contact me and let's talk. Thanks.
I might add that we met a high school junior who took advanced placement ecology during her sophomore year, and she thinks every student in high school should take AP ecology and understand what's going on. So we're going to work with her and other people to go to the school board, and she's going to get her friends and get some action going. Tomorrow we will have a 7th grader who has transformed the energy equation in Lexington, Massachusetts, and with 2 of her friends. So we've got more young people here than we've had at all our other conferences combined, and it's wonderful to see, because in many ways this is for them. But on the other end of the age spectrum, here's Jim Laurie to talk about.
You don't have to stay up here if you don't. Did you want to say anything about?
Yeah.
We got more questions?
Well, always more questions. Why don't you ask your question? In the meantime, we'll plug him in.
Okay, well, it's not so much a question as I've got two comments. First of all, I've been to the previous two conferences, which I have enjoyed. I've been to the last two conferences, and I was really, really impressed at the positive attitude and the list of things that people could take away with them and actually do something. I've been to many conferences, and most of them are gloom and doom, and you know, we've got to do something, but the previous ones have really been very positive. And then I also have another, not terribly serious comment, that I think you're holding this conference in the wrong museum. You've got the Blaschka flowers just next door. In Corning, we have the Blaschka sea creatures, which would be a much more appropriate place. So anyway, I encourage everybody who can to come to Corning and see them. It's a wonderful exhibition concentrating on conservation, not only of the glass models, but also of the creatures on which the models are based. So it's on until January, and I'd love to see everybody there.
Can I just put in a plug for, have you seen the book, A Sea of Glass? Have you seen this yet? That Drew Harvell just wrote. She actually wrote about the Blaschka's sea creature collection and how they've inspired a new look at ocean conservation. And so there's a really great book about exactly that.
Okay, so Jim is going to give us a sneak preview of Jim.
I don't know. Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm really wondering about these microphones. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Right now? Okay. I'm a biologist, and I've been trying to share the idea of biodiversity for about 30 years, and I've been kind of amazed at how Adam and Paula and all the volunteers and everything have put these things together. But the thing that gets me is that we live in a biological world, and that world is going to go back towards Ice Age. Now, wouldn't it be neat if we helped it along at this particular moment and maybe help modulate it a little bit on the way? And maybe we choose a different place that we want to stop, but it's kind of scary where it's going right now. And I thought, well, that's kind of an outrageous thing to say, so I thought I'd show you some pictures and think about what's going to happen tomorrow, because tomorrow's kind of like a dream of mine, getting all these people here in one place. So when I have this picture here, this is kind of an amazing picture. Not so much that it's Judy's book, but notice what's happened to these continents here. They're very hydrated, you know? And this is what life has been trying to do ever since it came out of the oceans, is trying to keep the water on the land. And humans seem like they spend most of their time trying to figure out how to get the water back to the oceans as fast as possible. Fresh water is much more valuable to our future than salt water. So thank you, Judy, for, I don't know where that picture came from, but you can tell us sometime. I had Jack Kittredge, who's the Northeast Organic Farmers, one of the big shots at Northeast Organic Farmers Association, NOFA. They're going to be here tomorrow. I don't think he's here now. I haven't seen Jack. But Jack asked me, well, how do I learn about this stuff? If I don't know anything about, you know, how biodiversity works, where do you start? And this is where you start. I think probably the greatest biologist of the 20th century was Lynn Margulis. And we would have, we were trying to get her here, but she happened to die a couple years ago. But what's really cool about this is Mark McMenamin, who probably knows Lynn's ins and outs better than anybody, he's speaking tomorrow. That Adam found him and got him here, and he's going to talk a lot about how life came out of the oceans and spent time on the land. But notice this picture here, the 5 kingdoms. When I went to college, how many kingdoms were there? We had 2 kingdoms. You had to be a plant or an animal, and Euglena kind of messed that up because it could move and it also did photosynthesis, and we were confused by that. But notice here you've got the animal kingdom. Now you've all got a hand, you know, so think about that. You've got the animal kingdom, which is kind of holding the earth here. You've got the plant kingdom. You've got the fungi kingdom, which we didn't know about back then. And then you've got these protists, these complex cells, and the kelps and things like that, but they don't have vascular systems. And then you have Look at here, the bacteria, and that's the thumb. Every system has to have good microbial systems, especially bacteria. You don't go without that. And look what it's holding here. It's holding the earth. And then there's this little kind of image of human faces. The human faces are now starting to understand what's going on. Wow. Consciousness has finally figured out a little bit about what's going on. Are we going to use it to help the process of life better or not? And I know that you are here now, so that's, I'm just saying, wow, nature wanted to be wet, slow the water down. Judy, this is your list here. Now, the thing Judy doesn't say a lot about is once all that water goes up in the air and it comes back down, a lot of heat is released up there. The more often you can recycle that water, the cooler the planet gets. So there she is. This is Lynn Margulis in the lab where they always found her next to the microscope. One of the best teachers. She ended up out at Amherst, at UMass Amherst. And what a character. So here's another character, and he's going to be here tomorrow. This is John and Nancy Todd are going to both be here. They started New Alchemy Institute in 1969. John left academia and they went to Cape Cod and started a little farm. And they built Bucky domes. And you can see Greg Watson's in the picture here, who ended up being the Massachusetts Agriculture Commissioner. And this is the reason I came to New England, was I was curious about this stuff. And here's the project at Harwich. And this is real septage lagoon waste going in one side, cranberry bog waste, some of the nastiest stuff. And I thought, I wonder if I can do this at the chemical plant. And this is how I learned, because I didn't believe this could work. And he put the fish down at this end, and they were the quality control. And after about 6 months of this, they thought, well, the fish got kind of antsy down here. Thought, well, let's slow down the process a little bit. And then after a while, the fish started migrating upstream. And they started moving faster and faster. Simple little project, fiberglass tanks, and 18 of them, I think. But they could take a lot of sunlight in and do a lot of photosynthesis really fast. We saw this happen in Texas, cleaning some really, really nasty stuff. So now education, these are, when you want to teach, you take them out to somebody that's doing stuff like that. This is, what's his name? Ed Tivnan out there near Amesbury. And he's growing plants in a greenhouse, but he's also, there's a fish tank down here that you don't see, but they're running fish water through the system. So the fish are feeding all that nitrogen to the system. So a lot of these kids are kids that are in my homeschool class. And so what do we want to teach? Well, their curriculum last year in environmental science, which they all took their AP environmental science test, and they all passed this year. Cows, because that told the story of what's going on in the land. And water, Alice Outwater, who lives in Vermont still, did a lot of work on trying to clean up Boston Harbor and ended up becoming a fan of the beaver. That when we had 100 million beaver on the continent or more, the continent was wet. And we had ice ages happening and things like that. Well, that's a picture that I drew trying to tie it all together. 1990s with Alan Savory, we thought everything was about dung beetles and putting it down below the ground, and that could be a huge... Animal digestion is one of the most powerful forces on the planet, and then we put all these powerful forces into feedlots. This is evil. Grass-fed beef is a very different animal than corn-fed, and I thought Adam explained it quite well in terms of the omega-3s and things like that. You want to have photosynthesis closer to these kind of animals. But then about 10 years ago, I realized that plants give an awful lot of their photosynthetic product to fungi, and fungi go find minerals deep, deep into the soil. And we're learning about that kingdom. It's a whole other order of magnitude of possibility. And I don't know who we've got talking about fungi tomorrow, but Christine Jones has been mentioned, and Paul Stamets. And then here's the guy. This is Alan Savory on his 80th birthday and the fish he caught in the Zambezi River. And he wanted to share that because nobody go fishing with him that day. And Alan Savory was the guy that he kept asking about grazing systems. Where are the microbes? Is it a brittle environment or a non-brittle environment? That's a big thing. What do we want? Alan would say that all the time. And so this is, we've seen them here in Boston. It's exciting. So soil, brain tissue. So kind of the plan here is to show a whole bunch of big ideas. There's going to be people talking about some of these tomorrow. And then I'm going to talk about some of them on Sunday morning. And I've got my kids coming to speak tomorrow morning too. And here's a beaver in Nevada that has do you see any wood in this system? Beaver don't need wood. They don't even need wet climates. They just need a little bit of help and they can rehydrate a place. Part of the kids' instruction was, I didn't know much about invertebrates, but I was trying to find something for the kids to read, and I wanted them to read Rachel Carson, but I didn't want them to read Silent Spring. I wanted them to read something about animals. Edge of the Sea talks about what the coast of Maine was like in the 50s when it was healthy, and it focuses on invertebrates and kelp and all that kind of stuff. Stuff I didn't know much about. This is how I learned it. This is how it should be. And they just really loved that book. And what came out of that is, we've got George Buckley coming here tomorrow. We've got, Peter Jurgis is coming. A lot of people talking about small organisms that I think you'll really enjoy. And here's the planktonic snow. This is what the bottom of the Gulf of Maine used to look like, And if you trawl, imagine what a trawler does to this kind of complexity. And all this planktonic snow, most of this is eggs of different species just mixed together. The little fish eat it, other things eat it. But that's the beginning of your food web. And if you trawl that, then the fish disappear because there's nothing for them to eat. So just think about that. What if we only trawled half of it? Wouldn't that be something? I'm thinking there'd be 10 times more fish. If we only trawled 20% of it, there'd probably be 100 times more fish. That's just, I could be wrong. We've got Pew coming here tomorrow. We finally got the Pew people. They've been working on forage fish. Here's the menhaden you've been hearing about. So come tomorrow and learn more about menhaden. Here I tried to tie the galaxy with the planktonic. I don't know if this looks the same. But actually, the kids spent a lot of time on Cosmos last year, learning that they are made out of star stuff. Where do the elements come from? Ultimately, we all came from stars. And they look at this, and I say, well, don't you think the things are pretty bad here on the Earth? Isn't that a little scary? I get a little scared about talking to 16-year-olds about things that I think are really kind of sad. And they say, well, gosh, Jim, it's not like a supernova. Why don't we just fix it? Why don't we get out there and make something happen? So I'm having to rethink how I teach in a lot of ways. I'm learning a lot more. So we've actually marked time by Halley's Comet. And they say it's Halley's Comet. So, take your pick. Newton and Halley figured out when the comet was going to come back. And it came back. They weren't even there when it came back. They'd been dead for over a decade. But wow, that changed history because we thought we could figure everything out. That didn't work out so good because a lot of things we can't figure out. But look what the CO2 was in 1759. About the same as it had been for 10,000 years. And look what it was after that, next time Halley's came around. Look what it is, 1910, when we started thinking that comets are made out of water because we went through the tail that time, and it was all this kind of ephemeral stuff. Oh, I messed up here. But now look what's happening now. 1986, 500, in 2061 when the comet comes back. And I really feel bad because these kids have already decided they're going to meet at that time. They'll be 60 years old. And this is what's happening. This is so unnecessary on a biodiverse planet. This is so unnecessary. We have worked so hard to unravel the systems. And so here's a picture. We've got Joe Roman coming here, and he worked on this process. The idea of digestion in animals is what made the ice ages possible. And he's also talking about whales. Look at the CO2 levels then. How long ago was that? Not that long ago. You look at this chart. 600,000 years ago, before, we never had 300. 400. It's been 2 million years since we had 400. But 200 happened 15,000 years ago. So, you know, now I say, well, why don't we get down to 300 and then have a party? It's kind of what I'm, you know, you might want to have some ice cream and burn some coal or something. So you can learn about all these organisms here and some of the best people in the world to talk about them. And if you have any questions about any of it, well, here they are. They're going to be up at 9 o'clock tomorrow. And the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for destruction. I believe that, and I really want to thank all the people that came, the Sarahs and Randi and Judy too. So I'm really happy that y'all could come down here tonight. So.